This video, Leash Reactivity, Cognition and Memory, is largely based on the behavioral research of memory and learning by Mark E. Bouton and Erik W. Moody. In addition, the textbook of Applied Dog Behavior and Training, Volume 1, by Stephen R. Lindsay was the source for information on canine cognition. There are 2 papers that accompany this video. They are both at pitbullguru.com and urbandogs.com. There's also a blog that was released in conjunction with this video at dogstardaily.com. It is suggested that you read through these papers and/or the blog for the most thorough discussion on the topic of leash reactivity and cognition and memory. I would like to give a very big thanks and acknowledge Jo Jocks for all her invaluable work in editing the papers, verifying that my research was holding water, and when needed, holding my feet to the fire. Her inclusion as editor and fact checker made all the difference in this information being disseminated with accuracy and in its most cogent form. A dog reacting on leash is challenging. However, it is a very normal matter of course for many dogs. Once we understand why it occurs and how in fact some reactivity is actually part of the dog's natural responses to either fear or frustrations, we can proceed with the assurance that the dog is not doing this to us on purpose with any sort of moral imperative or motivation to disobey us. In fact, dogs, when they are reacting at something, are either fearful or frustrated to some degree. Leash reactivity is founded in 2 main areas. The first is cognitive, meaning the processes of the dog's brain that serve to keep the dog alive and deal with survival and prey acquisition. The second is the emotional results, how the dog feels about it all. It is a combination of cumulative experiences of being on leash that result in the dog's responses in any given leash context. How the dog feels about the environment in the specific context will have a big effect on how the dog performs on leash. Cognitive processes responsible for attending to the environment and/or reacting to sudden stimuli are many, and the goal of all animals is to survive events. The Papez circuit theory is where stimulus information is sent to the primary pathway for the expression of experience and emotion. The Papez circuit is where environmental events are endowed with an emotional consciousness. This circuit houses the thalamus, hippocampus, and the cingulate gyrus, which all play a vital role in attending to the environment. Why do dogs orient to sudden changes? The orienting response is the technical term for when dogs pay attention to something in a manner that is considered an elaboration of non-specific orienting responses. Often we see this when dogs hear a novel sound or something enters the environment suddenly. The ascending reticular activating system, or the ARAS, processes general alertness and novelty of sounds as well. Theta waves are produced in the hippocampus area of the brain when the dog is met with novelty, pain, or frustration. We know that dogs experience quite a bit of novelty and frustration on leash intrinsically. Hopefully, there's no pain involved. The hippocampus also excites or inhibits behavior, mediates surprise and startle, deals with selectivity functions, and plays a vital role in habituation and learning. The hippocampus is in full work mode when the dog is contained on leash. It is important to note that the hippocampus also processes and stores long-term memory. The septohippocampal system, SHS, also mediates the expression of startle and novelty. In addition, this area of the brain also mediates other forms of adaptation such as habituation. Habituation helps with reduced reactivity. The SHS system has a vital role in the mediation of startle and surprise, and it supplies the dog with a comparator function that works on the predictive value or expectation by the dog. If the outcome is what the dog expects, then habituation occurs. However, even slight differences in the outcome or context can trigger an alarm response, and this results in a stop and think behavior by the dog. The behavioral inhibition system, or the BIS, is when the dog finds a significant difference between what is expected and what actually occurs, and this activates the BIS system. We can see this may be very active on a leash walk. The BIS, behavioral inhibition system, is particularly associated with punishment and frustration or non-reward events. The BIS prompts an animal to inhibit ongoing behavior or become more vigilant towards the stimulus. It's easy to see how this system may be very active and/or triggered significantly when a dog is on leash. We've all heard of the fight-flight system, known as the FFS, and this controls aggressive displays and predation. On leash, the dog's inability to create distance or close distance as they'd like is usually not possible most of the time. Thus, barrier frustrations occur as the fight-flight system is impeded. The BAS, the Behavioral Activation System, is associated with rewards and the termination of or avoidance of punishments. The BAS system helps with an animal's willingness to learn or alter behavior. Based on the information we just covered, it makes the scientific case for using rewards such as food, allowing the dogs to run a bit, gain distance as needed, or continue to gather scents freely on leash. Thus, we help to relieve stress to the systems that are processing fear, stress, and/or frustration. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for evaluating reward-punishment outcomes, has a significant role in goal-directed behavior and complex movements, as well as learning and problem-solving. The prefrontal cortex is also where short-term memory is processed and stored. It's clearly a large part of the dog's cognitive functions to pay attention to and be focused on changes in the environment for their safety, prey acquisition, and social functions. Many times when dogs are reacting, and there's no bite history or history of off-leash aggression or poor greetings, the dog may be simply experiencing frustration in dealing with not being able to act upon their intrinsic desires to greet or chase prey or gain some distance. Now let's look at the behavioral aspects of dogs on leash and how intrinsic stress, due to the loss of freedom and not having 100% mobility, may cause fear, frustration, and/or excitability. The thalamus is crucial for predatory behaviors, stalking, pouncing, chasing, and biting. The thalamus is also responsible for goal-directed behaviors that provide an intrinsic positive reinforcement along with dealing with the focus and attention of the dog's tasks. The dog is already primed by way of scent, sight, and sound and/or familiar sequences that have led to reacting, pulling, or general frustrations. In terms of fearful dogs that may shut down or react by lunging and barking, the following processes are all at play. The amygdala regulates fear and stress, cerebral cortex stores memories of conditioned aversive responses, caudate nuclei is where fear-related memories and voluntary movements are stored, and the hippocampus processes novelty, fear, frustration, as well as habituation and long-term memory. Dogs process all environments and their context changes and stimuli they encounter as safe, unsafe, or neutral. This is occurring at a rate faster than any computer known to man and faster than any human can fully address. The central question to ask when you have a reactive dog, be they fearful or frustrated or overly excited, is, what types of memories do you want to create for the dog? Based on the information so far presented in the video, we can see that dogs are attending to their environment all the time, mainly for the purposes of safety. Dogs that perceive their environment as less than safe, or for dogs that have had bad memories of the on-leash context, we can reduce these emotional debits by way of counter-conditioning, meaning pairing the events with either a high-value food reward for orientations or by creating more distance for avoidance to stop rehearsal of unwanted behavior. Perhaps we can gain some distance and set up to have a better advantage and do some training. Either way, what you'll be accomplishing is the creation of new memories, new learning, and less stress. There has been substantial research on memory and learning in animals, and we know for certain that dogs do have memories and that some memories can get in the way of learning new information. Dogs lack the sufficient serial memory to process events like humans do, so they're not planning to take over the world. Dogs are primarily influenced by semantic memory, which this next section will discuss. Here are some salient points to keep in mind. Short-term memory is stored in the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is also responsible for learning and problem-solving, as well as evaluating reward-punishment outcomes. The long-term memory is stored in the hippocampus, which is responsible for the mediation of surprise and startle, habituation and learning, as well as novelty, fear, and frustration. The temporal lobes store new memories. As has been discussed in previous videos, the goal for reactive dogs is to have them at an appropriate distance so when they see or hear the stimuli that causes reactivity, the handler can mark yes, and then reward the dog with food for under-threshold responses. This mark and pay upon orientation process creates new memories and primes the dog for retrieval of memories that the handler has been creating with conditioning. Many times we see this take form when the dog jumps the marker and starts looking for the reward or turning willingly to create distances. Extinction of reactive behavior does not translate into unlearning. Extinction leaves the old memory intact despite new learning being formed. The dog may not feel entirely good about the event, be it fearful or frustrating. However, if the dog has a new memory and is performing under-threshold behaviors, the stress is lowered. Extinction is especially dependent on context, especially the physical context. The on-leash context is changing all the time, even in minuscule ways that may begin the many antecedents that trigger reactivity. This is why it's advised to work the dog with counter-conditioning at various distances and various durational exposures so the dog has more of a generalization to the environments and contexts. There will always be exposures that the handler will not be able to mark and pay, and there will be exposures that do have the proper distances and durations built in, and the handler can reinforce with food rewards or more distance. When the handler can mark and pay for orientations or create some distance to stimuli, they should, as a way to prime the short-term memory into the long-term memory. Spontaneous recovery is when a dog will have a relapse of fear or frustration and the associated behaviors will ensue. This can occur after the dog has been conditioned for other responses and behaviors have been extinguished. Spontaneous recovery is when an extinguished response occurs after time has passed following the extinction. It can be viewed as the renewal effect that occurs when the conditioned stimulus, the thing that triggers reactivity or fear, is tested outside of its temporal context, meaning time has passed, thus the context has changed. Spontaneous recovery is susceptible to the passage of time, so no matter how well a dog has been conditioned, there will be something that appears after time has passed that triggers a dog to react or at least orient towards stimuli to some degree. Spontaneous recovery of a fearful or startling memory that causes reactivity or the dog shutting down is the reason why there is no guarantee that even despite the best conditioning, the dog will not react at something at some point or become fearful. Due to the phenomena of spontaneous recovery, 100% reduction of reactivity may not be possible. Remember, extinction of behavior is susceptible to context changes. It's considered that the context itself is a stimulus, not simply the dog or the person or the big-ticket items that cause reactivity. This is again validation that the dog can benefit greatly from general conditioning and general rewards to many aspects of the context. Bear in mind that conditioning is stronger than extinction alone, especially across temporal context changes, i.e. time passing, as well as physical context changes, new places or perhaps changes in familiar environments. Using fear or pain-based approaches and shutting the dog down will not yield as reliable or as sound a result as using conditioning and non-aversive extinction trials. This is due to extinction not being as reliable as conditioning. Counter-conditioning leash-reactive dogs for under-threshold responses occurs in conjunction with extinction based on the reward of food or distances being the second learned thing about the context. However tempting it might be to assume the original memory has been forgotten after conditioning and extinction, we know now this is not true, as memories can be triggered with a retrieval cue from the environment or from the handler. Mark E. Bouton and Erik W. Moody have stated in their research on the subject of memory and extinction the following. Retrieval of memory depends on a match between the conditions present during learning and the conditions present during testing. This bodes well for leash-reactive dogs, which have handlers that can condition the dog as they walk them, as they are being tested and taught new memories in the learning and testing environment all the time. It has been discovered that animals are great at incentive learning and short-term memory being primed. The variable for success is the human. The dog is ready and willing in most cases to stay under threshold. Conditioning responses, conditioning inhibition, and extinguishing behaviors all occur simultaneously when working with leash-reactive dogs that are being given both positive reinforcement in the form of food rewards and distances as negative reinforcement. The environmental cues that begin the trigger of fear or frustration responses before the actual big-ticket item appears that causes reactivity is one thing to keep in mind. However, with proper counter-conditioning, the dog can learn new responses which in turn become new memories. When simple mark and reward protocols are repeated as needed, the dog will stay under threshold more so than not, despite the potential of old memories lingering from time to time. Bouton and Moody state the following. The function of reward was not to stamp behavior in, but instead to motivate the animal to perform. A motivational function of reward is widely accepted in subsequent theories. Learning is not the same as performance. Motivation is required for the translation. They go on to state, learning involves encoding of information and storage of information, then retrieving it. Performance, they say, depends at least in part on successful retrieval. Lindsay further backs this up by confirming that contextual cues are significant for the animal as far as learning and unlearning behaviors. Outshining Bouton and Moody state is when other cues besides the context can support memory retrieval. If they are present in both training and testing context, then the context switch effect, which hinders retrieval of memories, is diminished. Considering leash reactive dogs are generally walked in the same environments with the same general stimulus packages, there's a myriad of chances for the dog to be met with something that causes reactivity or starts the chain that leads to over-threshold behaviors. Daily dog walks are usually similar to the previous day's events. Dogs, when properly conditioned, can retrieve memories that have been placed in the short-term memory. This can be done with a simple marker word, yes, and a reward of food that is used for under-threshold responses to stimuli at appropriate distances. The dog is learning and remembering what is required based on the human issuing positive reinforcement, food, and negative reinforcement, distance, in a contiguous manner. In time, the dog has built new memories, which translate into new performance sequences. It has been determined from a variety of sources in behavioral research that forgetting is not necessarily a result of original learning being erased. Forgetting may in fact be a result of a retrieval failure caused by a change of context. Bouton and Moody detail how memory works with first learned and second learned information about the context and the stimulus. When first learned information interferes with memory for second learned information, we have proactive interference. When second learned information interferes with first learned information, we have retroactive interference. In the domain of animal learning, retroactive interference is represented by several possible paradigms, including extinction or counterconditioning. In many cases, due to the processes of the amygdala, hippocampus, thalamus, and the prefrontal cortex, one of the many first learned things by the dog on leash is fear, stress, startle, or potential prey acquisition is thwarted, or all of the above, as catching food for animals can be innately dangerous and stressful at times. When the handler is marking yes for the initial orientation to stimuli while the dog is under threshold, then rewarding the dog with high-value food for staying under threshold, the dog is learning through retroactive interface that the stimulus predicts safety and food. The retrieval cue is the marker word yes. Conditioning is stronger than extinction alone and more effective against spontaneous recovery. Conditioning supports extinction as a second learned thing about the context. The main thing that handlers of leash reactive dogs must remember is that distance is the crucial parameter for under-threshold responses. There will be memories of the event stored in both short and long-term memory. Humans can shape those memories of stimuli and the environmental contexts once they develop better leash skills, food delivering skills, and more awareness to the environment to implement efficient training. Building new memories are achieved through conditioning and extinction, which both occur on a simultaneous continuum for dogs. This is what the process of marking yes and reinforcing with high-value food does, or when handlers are creating distance with negative reinforcements are accomplishing. No matter when or how it occurs on leash, these two components of high-value food rewards and distances will help ensure that memories are at least being created in the safe category for the dog. Bouton and Moody state, performance after extinction is a product of the animal's knowledge of two conflicting associations and how the context selects between them. Open environment conditioning can be summarized in the findings of Bouton and Moody's research into memory by this statement. The current amount of responding depends on the strength of the hypothetical association and the extent to which the animal currently values the outcome. Once again, Lindsay echoes this statement and references Bouton's work by saying, the extinction process serves only to reduce the future occurrence of the conditioned response, not eliminate it. Most dogs and handlers will face a reactive challenge at some point. Anyone that has worked with or cared for a dog that is prone to reactivity knows firsthand the potential stress involved in the daily dog walks. The goal with any leash reactivity protocol should be stress reduction for both dog and handler achieved safely. The reality is that both extinction and spontaneous recovery of fear or frustration are based upon context changes. That will occur. There is no perfection, only better percentages. Remember, cognitive processes are always at play that signal safe, unsafe, or neutral for dogs, and the dog's brains are wired for attending to the environment at all times. Many times, dogs perceive things that are unsafe even though they are safe. A large part of their cognitive functions are geared towards novelty and startle or sudden changes. Humans can shape the dog's memories. Reactivity is normal and necessary for dogs. Reactive behavior can be reduced, but know that it may always occur if the environment adds up as too intense for the dog. The handler's job is to focus on their behavior and the environment. Conditioning by using food rewards and proper distances, along with managing out to avoid rehearsals of reactivity, is more reliable in the long run than simply doing nothing or using fear and pain-based approaches. Remember, skill sets, not systems. It cannot be said enough, rely on your skill sets, not systems or methods. When the moment arises on leash and you need to train and manage your dog, you will need well-practiced mechanical skills based on awareness and leash mechanics, not a method. Dogs are not behaving with moral imperative against the handler when they react. They are mainly fearful or frustrated to some degree. There's no need to scold or place blame on the dog. The responsibility for safety and for improving the dog's responses rests squarely on the handler. Teach the dog they are safe first, and the rest of the learning process will go much easier. Remember, please view all the videos in the Less Stress, More Success series, as they all have valuable information on leash walking and dealing with leash reactivity. This has been a Canine Sun Media presentation.